At the Pelly one morning they were harnessing up Dolly, who had never been conspicuous for anything, went suddenly mad. She announced her condition by a long, heartbreaking wolf howl that sent every dog bristling with fear, then sprang straight for Buck. He'd never seen a dog go mad, nor did he have any reason to fear madness, yet he knew there was horror, and fled away from it in a panic. Straightway he raced, with Dolly panting and frothing, one leap behind, nor could she gain on him, so great was his terror, nor could he leave her, so great was her madness. He plunged through the wooded breast of the island, flew down to the lower end, crossed a back channel filled with rough ice to another island, gained a third island, curved back to the main river, and in desperation started across it. All the time, though he did not look, he could hear her snarling just one leap behind. Francois called him to a quarter of a mile away, and he doubled back, still one leap ahead, gasping painfully for air and putting all his faith that Francois would save him. The dog driver held the axe poised in his hand, and as Buck shot past him, the axe crashed down upon Mad Dolly's head. Buck staggered against the sled, exhausted, sobbing for breath helplessly. This was Spitz's opportunity. He sprang upon Buck, and twice his teeth sank into his unresisting foe, ripped and tore the flesh to the bone. Francois's leash descended, and Buck had the satisfaction of watching Spitz receive the worst whipping yet administered to the team. "One devil, dat Spitz," remarked Perrault. "Some day dat him kill dat Buck." "That Buck's two devils," was Francois's reminder. "All de time I watch Buck, I know for sure. Listen, some damn fine day he get mad like hell, and him chew dat Spitz all up, and spit him out on de snow. Sure I know." From then on it was war between them. Spitz, as lead dog and acknowledged master of the team, felt his supremacy threatened by this strange South dog. And strange Buck was to him, for many of the Southland dogs he had known, not one had shown up worthy in camp on trail. They were too soft, dying under the toil, the frost and starvation. Buck was an exception. He alone endured and prospered, matching the husky in strength, savagery, and cunning. There was a masterful dog, and what made him dangerous was the fact that the club of the man in the red sweater had knocked all blind pluck and rashness out of his desire for mastery. He was preeminently cunning and could bide his time with a patience that was nothing less than primitive. It was inevitable that the clash for leadership should come. Buck wanted it. He wanted it because of his nature, and he'd been gripped tight by that nameless, incomprehensible pride of the trail and trace, pride that holds dogs in the toil to the last gasp, which lures them to die joyfully in the harness and breaks their hearts if they're cut out of the harness. This was the pride of Dave, his wheel dog, of Solix as he pulled with his strength, pride that lay hold of them at the break of camp, transforming them from sour sullen brutes into straining, eager, ambitious creatures. The pride that soared them all day and dropped them back at the pitch of camp at night, letting them fall back into gloomy unrest and uncontent. This was the pride that bore up Spitz and made him thrash the sled dogs who blundered and shirked in the traces, or hid away at harness-up time in the morning. Likewise, it was this pride that made him fear Buck as a possible lead dog, and this was Buck's pride too. He openly threatened the other's leadership. He came between him as the shirks he would have punished, and he did it deliberately. One night there was a heavy snowfall, and in the morning Pike, the malingerer, did not appear. He was securely hidden in the nest under a foot of snow. Francois called him and sought him in vain. Spitz was wild with wrath. He raged through the camp, smelling and digging every likely place, snarling so frightfully that Pike heard and shivered in his hiding place. When at last he was unearthed and Spitz flew at him to punish him, Buck flew with equal rage in between. So unexpected was it, and so shrewdly managed, that Spitz was hurled backward and off his feet. Pike, who'd been trembling abjectly, took heart at this mutiny and sprang upon his overthrown leader. Buck, to whom fair play was a forgotten code, likewise sprang upon Spitz, but Francois, chuckling at the incident, while unswerving in the administration of justice, brought his lash down upon Buck with all his might. This failed to drive Buck from his prostrate rival, and the butt of the whip was brought into play. Half stunned by the blow, Buck was knocked backward, and the lash laid upon him again and again, while Spitz soundly punished the many-time offending Pike. In the days that followed, as Dawson grew closer and closer, Buck still continued to interfere between Spitz and the culprits, but he did it craftily when Francois was not around. With a covert mutiny of Buck, a general insubordination sprang up and increased. Dave and Solix were unaffected, but the rest of the team went from bad to worse. Things no longer went right. There was continual bickering and jangling. Trouble was always afoot, and at the bottom of it was Buck. He kept Francois busy, for the dog driver in a constant apprehension of the life and death struggle between the two he knew must take place sooner or later. And on more than one night the sound of quarreling and strife among the dogs turned him out of his sleeping robe, fearful Buck and Spitz were at it. But the opportunity didn't present itself, and they came into Dawson one dreary afternoon with the great fight still to come. Here were many men and countless dogs, and Buck found them all at work. It seemed the ordained thing that dogs should work. All day they swung up and down Main Street in long teams, and at night their jingling bells still went by. They hauled cabin logs and firewood, freighted to the mines, and did all manner of work that horses did in the Santa Clara Valley. Here and there Buck met Southland dogs, but in the main they were wild wolf husky breeds. Every night, regularly at 9, 12, and 3, they lifted a nocturnal song, a weird, eerie chant, in which it was Buck's delight to join. With the aurora borealis flaming coldly overhead, and the stars leaping at the frost dance, the land numb and frozen under its pall of snow, the song of the huskies might have been the defiance of life, only it was pitched in minor key with the long wailings and half-sobs. It was more pleading of life, the articulate travel of existence. It was an old song, old as the breed itself, one of the first songs of the younger world, in a day when songs were sad. It was invested with the woe of an unnumbered generations, this plaint by which Buck was so strangely stirred. When he moaned and sobbed, it was the pain of living that was old, and the pain of his wild fathers, and a fear and mystery of cold and dark that was to them fear and mystery. And that he should be stirred by the mark of its completeness with which he began, his hatred back through the ages, and roofed to the raw beginnings of life in the howling ages. 7 days from the time they pulled into Dawson, they dropped down the steep bank by the barracks to the Yukon Trail, and pulled for Dyea and Saltwater. Perot was carrying dispatches, if anything more urgent than those he'd brought in, and a travel pride had gripped him, and he purposed to make the record trip of the year. Several things favored him in this. This week's rest has recuperated the dogs and put them through in trim. The trail they had broken into the country was packed hard by later journeyers, and further, the police had arranged in 2 or 3 places deposits of grub for food and for dog and man, and he was traveling light. They made 60 Mile, which is a 50-mile run, on the first day. The second day saw them booming up the Yukon well on their way to Pelly. Such splendid running was achieved not only with great trouble and vexation on the part of Francois. The insidious revolt led by Buck had destroyed the solidarity of the team. It was no longer as one dog leaping in the traces. The encouragement Buck gave the rebels led them into all kinds of petty misdemeanors. No more was Spitz a leader, greatly to be feared. The old awe departed, and they grew equal to challenging his authority. Pike robbed him of fish one night, and gulped it down under the protection of Buck. Another night, Dub and Joe fought Spitz, and made him forego the punishment they deserved. And even Billy, the good-natured, was less good-natured and whined not half as plaintively as in former days. Buck never came near Spitz without snarling and bristling menacingly. In fact, his conduct approached that of a bully, and he was given to swaggering up and down before Spitz's very nose. The breakdown of discipline affected the dogs in relations with one another. They quarreled and bickered more than among themselves, till at times the camp was a howling bedlam. Dave and Salix alone were unaltered, though they were irritable with the unending squabble. Francois swore strange, barbarous oaths, and stamped the snow in a futile rage, and tore his hair. His lash was always singing around the dogs, but it was of small avail. Directly his back was turned, they were at it again. He backed up Spitz with his whip, but Buck backed up the remainder of the team. Francois knew the trouble was behind him, and Buck knew he knew. But Buck was too clever ever again to be caught red-handed. He worked faithfully in the harness, for the toil had become a delight to him, and it was a greater delight to slyly precipitate a fight among his mates and tangle the traces. At the mouth of Tequina one night after supper, Dub turned up a snowshoe rabbit, blundered it, and missed. In a second, the whole team was in full cry. 100 yards away was a camp of Northwest police, with 50 dogs, huskies all who joined the chase. The rabbit sped down the river, turned up a small creek, up the frozen bed of which it held steadily. Rained lightly on the surface of the snow, while the dogs plowed through by main strength. Buck led the pack, 60 strong around bend after bend, but he couldn't gain. He lay down to the race, whining eagerly, his spent body flashing forward, leap by leap, in the wan moonlight. Leap by leap, like some pale frost wraith, the snowshoe rabbit flashed on ahead. All that stirring of old instincts which at stated periods drives men out from the sounding cities to forest and plain to kill things by chemically propelled lead bullets, bloodlust, joy to kill, all this was Buck's, only it was infinitely more intimate. He was raging at the head of the pack, running the wild thing down, living meat to kill with his own teeth, and wash his muzzle to the eyes in warm blood. There's an ecstasy that marks the summit of life, and beyond which life cannot rise. And such is the paradox of living. This ecstasy comes when one is most alive, and it comes as a complete forgetfulness that one is alive. This ecstasy, this forgetfulness of living, comes to the artist, caught out of himself in a sheet of a flame. It comes to the soldier, war mad on a stricken field and refusing quarter. And it came to Buck, leading the pack, sounding a wolf cry, straining after the food that was alive, and fled swiftly before him through the moonlight. He was sounding the deeps of his nature and the parts of his nature that were deeper than he, going back to the womb of time. He was mastered by the seer surging of joy of life, tidal wave of being, the perfect joy of each separate muscle, joint, and sinew, that in itself was everything that was not death. It was a glow and rampant, expressing itself in movement, flying exultantly under the stars and over the face of dead matter that did not move. But Spitz, cold and calculating even as supreme moods, left the pack and cut across a narrow neck of land where the creek made a long bend around. Buck didn't know this, and as he rounded the bend, the frost wraith of a rabbit still flitting before him, he saw another larger frost wreath leap from the overhanging bank into the immediate path of the rabbit. It was Spitz. The rabbit couldn't turn, and as the white teeth broke its back in midair as it shrieked loudly as a stricken man may shriek. At sound of this, the cry of life plunging from the life's apex into the grip of death, the full pack at Buck's heels raised a hell's chorus of delight. Buck didn't cry out. He didn't check himself, but dove in upon Spitz shoulder to shoulder, so hard that he missed the throat. They rolled over again in the powdery snow. Spitz gained his feet almost as though he had not been overthrown, slashing down through the shoulder and leaping twice. Twice his teeth clipped together like the steel jaws of a trap, and he backed away for better footing with lean, lifting lips that writhed and snarled. In a flash, Buck knew it. The time had come. It was to the death. As they circled about, snarling, ears laid back, keenly watching for the advantage, the scene came to Buck with a sense of familiarity. He seemed to remember it all. White woods and earth and moonlight and a thrill of battle. Over the whiteness and silence brooded a ghostly calm. There was not the faintest whisper of air. Nothing moved. Not a leaf quivered, the visible breaths of dogs rising slowly and lingering in a frosty air. They made short work of the snowshoe rabbit, these dogs that were ill-tamed wolves, and now they were drawn up in an expectant circle. They, too, were silent, their eyes only gleaming and their breaths drifting slowly upward. To Buck it was nothing new or strange, this scene of old time. It was though it had always been the wonted way of things. Spitz was a practiced fighter. From Spitzenberg through the Arctic and across Canada and the Barrens, he held his own with all manner of dogs and achieved mastery over them. Bitter rage was his, but never blind rage. In passion to rend and destroy, he never forgot that his enemy was in like passion to rend and destroy. He never rushed till he was prepared to receive a rush, and never attacked till he first defended that attack. In vain Buck strove to sink his teeth in the neck of the big white dog. Wherever his fangs struck for the softer flesh, they were countered by the fangs of Spitz. Fang clashed fang, and lips were cut and bleeding, but Buck couldn't penetrate his enemy's guard. Then he warmed up and enveloped Spitz in a whirlwind of rushes. Time and time again he tried for the snow-white throat, where life bubbled near to the surface, and each time and every time Spitz slashed him and got away. Then Buck looked to rushing as though for the throat, when suddenly drawing back his head and curving him from the side, he'd drive his shoulder at the shoulder of Spitz as a ram to overthrow him. But instead, Buck's shoulder was slashed down each time as Spitz leaped lightly away. Spitz was untouched, while Buck was streaming with blood and panting hard. The fight was growing desperate. All the while, the silent wolfish circle waited to finish off whichever dog went down. As Buck grew winded, Spitz took over to rushing and kept him staggering for footing. Once Buck went over and the whole circle of 60 dogs started up, but he recovered himself almost in midair, and the circle sank down again and waited. But Buck possessed a quality that made for greatness, imagination. He fought by instinct, but he could fight by head as well. He rushed as though attempting the old shoulder trick, but at the last instant swept low to snow and in. His teeth closed on Spitz's left foreleg. There was a crunch of breaking bone, and the white-faced dog faced him on 3 legs. Thrice he tried to knock him over, then repeated the trick and broke the right foreleg. Despite the pain and helplessness, Spitz struggled madly to keep up. He saw the silent circle with gleaming eyes, lolling tongues, and silvery breaths drifting upward, closing in on him, as he had seen similar circles close in upon beaten antagonists in the past. Only this time he was the one who was beaten. There was no hope for him. Buck was inexorable. Mercy was a thing reserved for gentler climbs. He maneuvered for the final rush. The circle had tightened till he could feel the breath of the huskies on his flanks. He could see them beyond Spitz and to his side, crouching for the spring, their eyes fixed upon him. A pause seemed to fall. Every animal was motionless as though he turned to stone. Only Spitz quivered and bristled as he staggered back and forth, snarling with a horrible menace as though to frighten off impending death. Then Buck sprang in and out, and he was in. Shoulder at last squarely met shoulder. The dark circle became a dot on the moon-flooded snow as Spitz disappeared from view. Buck stood and looked on, the successful champion, the dominant primordial beast who had made his kill and found it good.